The biometrics of the Patterson-Gimlin, I've looked at personally. I know other professional anthropologists who've looked at them, and of course, it's been analyzed to death over the years. And I cannot see any flaw. If that were a hoax, it was an extraordinary one at best. And I any any hoaxing involved at all in that.
This is, of course, the Caffeinated Cryptid podcast, and I am your host, Bobby Dizzle. All ways to watch, listen, and follow this podcast are listed in the description, as well as bobbydizzle.com.
I remember when I was driving through Chautauqua, I remember seeing a sign, and it had a big picture of Bob Gimlin, and then it had a picture of Sasquatch on there, and it said Chautauqua Bigfoot this way, towards the left, and I'm like, well, I don't have time to stop, but I'm like, this looks really interesting,
If they took the time to put Gimlin on there, it must be.
Yeah. I've met Bob a couple of times. He's real interesting. But yeah, he's doing. I mean, he's basically retired in Yakima. But I got a chance to sit down and talk with him twice.
What do you think? Was he telling the truth?
Oh yeah. No, I mean, the biometrics of the Patterson-Gimlin, I've looked at personally. I know other professional anthropologists who've looked at them, and of course, it's been analyzed to death over the years. And I cannot see any flaw. If that were a hoax, it was an extraordinary one at best. And I any hoaxing involved at all in that. And it's I have not been to the Patterson-Gimlin film site, Bluff Creek. Now you can go with a tour. There occasionally is somebody who'll take groups of people up to the film site, and it looks very different now.
Mm-hmm.
When Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin had filmed in '67, and it looks very different, the site, because things have overgrown, and they have little trail markers, like there's certain trees that are still there that were there in the film site, and they use those as tag markers for where Patty walked. And it looks really interesting. I would love to just go and see it, but I haven't been to Northern California in probably 15 years. So, and when I was, I didn't go to the Trinity River National Forest, which is the forest that it's located on, and it's actually right up against the Hoopa Nation. So I think if you don't go with a guide, I don't know how you get permission to even get on. But Bigfoot books closed down. That was one of the bigger things.
Burned down.
Yeah, burnt down. Sorry, it burnt down. Yeah.
He's coming back though. He's coming.
I hope so, because he had an extraordinary collection, from what I understand.
I've had Robert Leiterman and Daniel Perez on.
Oh, Daniel.
Yep. They're the Bluff Creek project gurus there.
Yep.
And so I could talk to Robert Leiterman for 10 days straight. Just doing crack. Just tell me some more stories, because he was a park ranger.
Yeah. Yep. That's right.
He just keeps going. I mean, I was expecting to be kind of, when you get these guys that are bigger, you kind of expect to get kind of a cold fish Stonewall.
Yeah.
Like you get yes or no answers. You get the official. This dude was going rabbit holes on me. I'm like, what have I done? He's an amazing human.
Yeah.
Daniel was cool too.
Yeah. I know. I've known Daniel for years. He actually made it to this year's Ohio Bigfoot conference. This is the year I was not able to go because I had some professional I was doing, but folks I haven't seen in 7 or 8 years ended up going this past year, and I missed them. And I'm like, look, guys, you guys have to show up next year so we can all get together again. Because there's a group of researchers I've known for 20 some years that go every year. And I missed it this year.
So Ohio's a big one.
The Ohio Bigfoot Conference is the second largest Bigfoot conference in the United States. I think outside of, it's either Beachfoot or there's one in Oregon, I believe, that's larger. I think it's Beachfoot, but that's by invitation only. Invited to that, and I've always wanted to go. I have friends that have gone, but I have not gone. to Beachfoot. Yeah.
I was a guest on a show where he was also a guest on a little panel.
Yeah.
I can't remember his name. Oscar
Yeah.
Marcus.
Yeah. I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
He was an old white guy with a beard. It narrows it down.
Yep. 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 Yep.
What time of year is the Ohio thing?
It is in May. It's
May.
here. If you go on to Ohio Bigfoot Conference, you can see they don't release the tickets until December 1st, but you can get a room in Salt Fork Park, Salt Fork Lodge, is where they have it, and their speakers are Meldrum. Many people you've probably interviewed are
Mm-hmm.
regular speakers. At the Renee from Finding Bigfoot.
Mm-hmm.
She's a regular guest. She'll be here next year. I know Renee. Jeff Meldrum's going to be a guest next year. I talk to Jeff when I see him. He's at Pocatello and up in Idaho where he teaches. And when I always like to hook up with him because he's the only other anthropologist I know that that's open about their research and has been doing it for years. But it's I know two other anthropologists, but because they're tenured, they will not be on podcasts. They won't go to conferences. But they both had sightings and they both do field work area. But because of the terrible academia has not caught up with this subject matter. And so treated unless you're doing it in the realms of I'll talk a little bit about this on your podcast. Unless you're dealing with mythology, Bigfoot, you can talk about in the classroom under very specific circumstances. Anything outside of that, you can it becomes very much a risk-taking venture. Even today, I knew people who have been pulled up classrooms and have been pulled aside by deans and told you do not, you don't. And so, I know people who that this has happened to. So yeah, it's interesting. I always tell Jeff, I said, you are very lucky. I'm always like, you are the exception to the rule, my friend.
Yeah, he's the epitome of knowing the rules to get away with them. And just by the way, I hit record just because we have the casual conversation. I may start it. I may start the convo like 5 minutes ago.
Sure. That's totally fine. I'm good.
Yeah.
I'm very relaxed. I'm very, low key, however you want to do this. I'll talk about my experiences and very lucky to have had two in a very short period of time. And when I tell people, I jokingly, I've met people, ironically, from Oregon, Washington, the Pacific Northwest, that have been researching Sasquatch and Bigfoot for decades and have never had a sighting. They've heard things, they've actually seen footprints, but they've never had a sighting. And I've had two of them, one in 2014, and the other one in 2017. And I'm like, one was in Maryland and one was in Canada. But I'm like, and I wasn't anticipating the experience, although the 2014 sighting in Maryland was terrifying to say the least. I'll go into that whenever you want to talk about my sighting, but that I will never forget. Unfortunately, I did not have equipment with me. And so all I have is my testimony of what I saw, the two creatures I saw, and they came back to my camp after dark. And it was absolutely terrifying. The one in Canada had witnesses, trained witnesses. It was almost like the perfect setup. And I'm waiting for the researcher in Canada. I'll mention his name, but the FLIR footage has not been released. But because this cryptozoologist is so eminent in the field, when I mentioned that my sighting with this cryptozoologist, they're like, "Oh, we heard about your FLIR capture in Harrison Hot Springs. We heard about that." I'm like, "Yep, it hasn't been released yet. The report was formally taken by Tom Steenberg, who is the major researcher, Sasquatch researcher in Canada." And I know Tom, and he wrote Alberta Sasquatch. That was his book. But really, it was really extraordinary. And we got physical evidence, visual evidence, and 5 people saw this. But it has not been the footprints, which I have pictures of, and the FLIR footage, which captured the creature coming down the ridgeline, was clear. It was unmistakably not a human. And then the next day we found tracks, 17.5-inch tracks, and we found a trackway coming down the ridge, and we got those cast, 4 of them cast, clear casts of them. And so, it baffles me, but it has not been released to the public. And this was in 2017. And why it's being sat on is beyond me. But everyone, the researcher, ironically, Small Town Monsters did a film about the Canadian sightings, and the sighting that I was a part of was verbally mentioned in the film, but they didn't interview myself or the other researchers that were there that afternoon. And it was freezing cold. I don't know if you've ever been to Canada, but it
I
was
haven't.
it's January. I think it was at 5 or 6 thousand feet. And
Ooh,
I was no one was dressed appropriately. And we had had a sighting in the afternoon, and we decided to go up the mountain and then come back down. And as we were coming back down the mountain, we caught it coming. It was like following us back towards our initial place. And the snow was up to our at one point was up to our knees. We couldn't, and none of us really had appropriate. I had boots on, but another person had a biker's jacket. It wasn't even, no one was appropriately dressed. And isn't that always the case with Bigfoot? When you have a Bigfoot sighting, no one's got equipment, but we happen to have a FLIR with us. And it was one of the very high powered ones. It was up on the bed of a truck, and we had gotten it perfectly. So when this thing came down, and it would hide behind a tree, come down, hide behind a boulder, go back up, come back down. And we got this. It was at least about 4 minutes of it on FLIR, clear footage, and it's never been released. And it's just like, so I'm hoping and compelling the person who holds the footage, and they're well-known cryptozoologists, to release the footage, and to maybe have all of us on a panel and talk about it. And this was in January of 2017, so this is a number of years ago, and I remember it like it was yesterday.
so that was one of the questions I was going to ask, is if your 2017 one was the you said it had eyewitnesses, what you just told me about. I wondered if it was just like a series of sightings in the area or at one time. So it was at one time.
It was a one time. What had happened is it's called Sasquatch Provincial Park. So I had been visiting my friends in Canada, and my best friend is married to the cryptozoologist, and he's most noted for his work in Ogopogo. So he's the informative expert on Ogopogo, Lake Okanagan. So I went up to visit, just for a social visit, and I saw Vancouver. I did all the touristy stuff, and had never been to Canada. It was my first trip to British Columbia. I'd been to other parts of Canada before, but not British Columbia. And he's like, "Hey, let's go up to Harrison and see what." So a group of us piled into his car, and we went up to Harrison Hot Springs and went to Sasquatch Provincial Park. And they had the main gate. There's a gate that lets you in, and it was closed for whatever reason. It was a yellow gate, and it was closed. And we pulled up, and of course it's cold out, so it's not warm. And we got out of the car, and we're looking around, and we thought, well, we'll go up. There was a logging road that went up the side of the mountain, and we knew that the car that we initially had would not make the trip up. So we called another Canadian researcher who had a truck, who could take us up the logging road. So as we're sitting there talking about what we're going to do and how we're going to, visit the park, we looked up. There's a ridge line that goes right up the mountain, and then if you go down, there's a lake at the bottom, and then there's a sort of like a prairie area, and people camp there, whatever. And we looked up, and we saw this large figure between two redwood trees. and it was massive. And we looked and looked, and like the cryptozoologist I was with had never had a Bigfoot sighting before, and had been in cryptozoology for like 30 years. So this was his first sighting, and we looked up, and the sun was behind the creature, so we saw the silhouette. And so my friend, who's also First Nation, she raised her hand up to wave like this. So she went up to wave her hand up like this to wave at it, and the creature replicated the wave like this, and we could see the hair off of the arm. And this thing we went later and measured, and the creature was well over 8 feet tall. So we when the creature raised its hand like this, everybody could see that this was not a person, and could see that. And so this is the afternoon, so it's like 4:30, 5 o'clock. So it's getting dusk, and we figured, oh, we can't leave. We've got to. So we made phone calls to bring in people that had equipment, because all we were just sightseeing, And we pick up the phone. We call his friend, who is a big Sasquatch researcher in this area, and we said we can't go up the mountain because we don't have the right car, and we need equipment. We need a flare, we need different things. And the guy says, Zach said, I'll be right there. So later that afternoon, I think we went back and got food someplace, and we came back and met him. Then we went back up the mountain. The snow was too deep, so we finally took the truck and came back down the mountain. And this, of course, it's dark now. And we pull the truck up right against the yellow gate where we had the sign, where it had been locked off. And he said, so he took his flare, and we shined it up where we had the afternoon sighting, and lo and behold, the creature came back. And so at this point, we're all now, having seen it visually in the afternoon, we're now all looking through the finder of the flare to verify. And this thing had come back down the mountain, where it had stood before, excuse me, and was looking through the trees again at us, and then was kind of doing the rocking back and forth thing, and then came back down, went behind a rock, a boulder, and was kind of peeking and tearing, and then would go back up a little bit, come back down. And it did this for a while, and finally we lost sight of it. We couldn't get it on flare anymore. And then we saw small rodents and things under the rock pile, which we initially thought were eye shine, but it wasn't. It was just like mice and whatever. And that was the sighting. So that is 4 people who had a visual encounter. And then we had the flare, and we were there for hours, even after we couldn't get the creature. And we were calling out, we were doing calls, trying to get a response, doing different things. And finally, the activity died down, and we left. And then the next day we came back, and we found a trackway. And we were able to cast, I believe it was 3 to 4 17.5-inch casts. And we measured it. We made very clear casts. And then we called Tom Steenberg, who we had visited earlier, a day before. We had visited Tom. We called him up, and he was sort of the Canadian equivalent of the BFRO. So essentially, Tom took our stories. He interviewed all of us. In fact, when I came back from Canada, he called me in my home here in Maryland and interviewed me again. And then, he took pictures of the cast. I still have pictures of the casts. And had seen the flare footage as well. But the flare footage has never been released. And it's some of the clearest I've ever seen. I mean, I've seen other flares from other researchers, but what we got was fairly clear, and it's unmistakably, it wasn't a human. It was a Sasquatch. Probably, obviously you can't make scale of gender or of age, but this thing, the track was 17.5 inches, and it was about almost 5 inches wide. So that is a huge track. So we're assuming it was probably an adult male. We think possibly, but I mean, to have that many eyewitnesses see this, then to get that kind of physical evidence is extremely rare. And that was my 2017 encounter. My 2014 encounter was in Maryland. It was north of Darnestown. So it was in a protected wilderness area. And it's an area I hike recreationally. I hike there for my own, just for my own health or whatever. And I'm an outdoors, I'm a nature person anyway. So, but I had noticed going back several years that I was hearing very strange calls. I would hear wood knocks even during the day when I would be down by the creek. It was along what's called Seneca Creek. And I would get, and then finally, a friend of mine this is 2014, so I was kind of new to actually being in the field researching Sasquatch, had said, have you ever thought of leaving food out? And I'm like, I wasn't like, I'm not that I didn't want to do that, but they're like, leave out peanut butter. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. And they're like, leave out peanut butter.
It's always peanut butter. Everybody starts with peanut butter.
And I found out it's not crunchy. It has to be creamy peanut butter. They will not do so I said, sure.
They hate crunchy. Everybody's always,
but they're that picky. So I would go and buy these off-brand peanut butter at the store, and I would leave them in a very remote area. So I know, it wasn't being seen by hikers. But once I started leaving food, they became much more interested in me, and they would start like the one day I was there, I saw it did not have casting material, but I saw a very clear print in the mud going towards where I was leaving the peanut butter by a tree. And every time it would be gone. And the crazy thing about the peanut butter, I don't know if you've interviewed people who have had these experiences, but not only do they eat the peanut butter, but it's licked so clean it looks like it's been through a dishwasher.
Yes, I've heard that quote several times.
Yeah,
looks just like it's been clean, put back out there.
Yeah, and sometimes the lid is even screwed back on, but there's always bite marks in it. And I have saved every jar that I've ever kept. And one, they have clear bite marks, and these are not raccoon bite marks. These are not human, where they've bit into the lid and left marks. I probably have DNA evidence if I could afford to do an eDNA or to do any sort of DNA, whether it would still be viable, because this is a number of years ago. But I've saved all of my peanut butter jars and lids that were returned. And I've got some other interesting evidence that I wanted to do a formal academic paper on this, but I have found bone kills with tools. So
Really?
So I have found lithic tools to dismember bones, sinewy, and left at these kill sites. So, I mean, there's a lot of controversy about what Sasquatch is. If it's a hominid, if it is of a hominid form, it probably has some sort of culture and the ability to communicate. I mean, the Sierra Sounds are very famous, but more than likely, this is my opinion. I'm not speaking for the Bigfoot community, but my opinion is that if these things are not just undiscovered anthropoids, if we're dealing with a creature of a hominid form, hominids use tools. They were tool makers. They used their hands because they were free. They have opposable thumbs. And, but it's interesting. And I kept some of these tools. I have some of them, but I tried to share it with a fellow anthropologist that works in this field, not Dr. Meldrum, but another one. And they looked at me like I was crazy. And I'm like, their concept of Sasquatch and Bigfoot in their head was that this is an ape. This is some undiscovered ape. And that's, so it's not making tools. But this bone cache that I found that was actually hidden under leaf debris, up against the side of a natural hillside, in this area in Maryland, I found these tools, these lithic tools I found, actually had fresh deer blood on them. So this wasn't, and it was the bones of many animals, not just deer. So it was coyote, deer, raccoon. I was able to identify some of the bones that I was looking at. And so, this was something that was intriguing to me, because I myself thought I would never find something like this. But when I found some of these tools, this is leading up to my sighting, so I'll talk about that too. But I kept some of them in my collection, and I have shown them to researchers. I have shown them to people who have a background in lithic technology. These were not. I'm familiar enough with the indigenous cultures of Maryland, archaeologically as well, because I've done archaeology in Maryland, to know that these were not from the local tribes. These were freshly made tools. They were found on the surface with this bone cachet. So that was something that it's something I would love to talk about in the conference, but people, this concept of Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever these creatures are, it currently doesn't lend itself. Basic, if you want to be on the scientific end of things, we have no body, we have no evidence of that. So to then infer language, to then infer lithic and tool technology is a bit far, even in the scientific community, the supportive scientific community. But yeah, so that was something that I had found personally, including tracks and sounds and wood knocks in this area. And I was going out, because this area is relatively close to where I live. I was going out at least twice a week to check things, to check the areas I'd been over. And I found that the more and more I would go into a certain area where it was like they knew I was looking for them. It's like they were obviously, there must have been, if it was a small family group or a couple of individuals, knew that I knew they were there. Obviously, I'm leaving food, what have you. I'm looking around. So the more frequently I would go out, even if I didn't bring food, but it was like they knew I was there. And I got the very strong sense in certain areas. I would go up by myself, not with people. So I was very close-lipped about this research area, except with one or two individuals who, one actually went out with me and was there when this sighting incident happened. But that was something that was intriguing. So I'm rambling on. If you have any questions, just let me.
Oh no, I had one. It was about the 2017 sighting. What did he raise in the air? What did he do before the sighting started back again?
Well, what had happened is my friend who's First Nation, whose husband was a cryptozoologist, she had raised her hand like this, to wave at it, and supposedly this is a tradition in some tribes, in Canada, is to give an understanding that we are friendly. So she raised her hand like this up to it, and it raised its hand right back, and you could clearly see the hair off the arm. I mean, it was like, like this off the entire arm, and it was massive. I mean, this thing was, I'm estimating it to 7.5 to 8 feet.
Mhm.
And the shoulders on this thing, I mean, it was just absolutely massive. But it was in shadow, so we couldn't, you couldn't make out. You could see the head, you could see the shoulders, but you couldn't make out facial features.
Mm.
And so the thing is after this thing disappeared, in the afternoon, at dusk, we all ran up there. We tried to cross the guard and go up the hill, and it was so treacherous going up the hill. I mean, we didn't have like hiking boots. We had nothing. But we still tried to manage to hoof it up there to see if we could find anything. But it was so dark out, and the canopy in the Northwest Coast is just, it's impenetrable. I mean, it's dark even during the day. You need a flashlight. It's no wonder nobody sees anything in the Northwest Coast unless you really, because it's just so impenetrable. But so we ended up coming back down, and going back, and then going back up the mountain, because we thought we could possibly catch it going up. And as we were going up in the truck, he had a flatbed truck. As we were going up the truck, we hit a certain elevation, and it was all snow. And so, I mean, it was all snow, and we could not, we had no capability of going any further. And then we stepped out of the truck to see if we could walk up, but the snow was up to our knees at that point, and it was January, and in British Columbia. So, I mean, that's kind of what you expect. But yeah, so that was that event. But yeah, so it's interesting. I mean, I've done research a lot of the research I've done on my own, and even through the years looking up ethnographic records on Bigfoot. We could do an entire show just on the ethnohistory of Sasquatch, because that is
Oh yeah.
really fascinating. But, and I've said this before at conferences, and I've said this before to my friends who are professional researchers, the most compelling evidence for the existence of Bigfoot, Sasquatch, and relic hominids around the world is the ethnographic evidence, because indigenous peoples have had experiences with these creatures all over the world, including Indonesia and throughout Siberia, Central Asia, in particular Central Asia. And these are matter of fact. Indigenous people see these creatures as matter of fact, and they have a cultural encounter explanation for them. It's like, when you encounter these creatures, this is what you do. You know, they're very matter of fact about how they approach this. So the idea that these are a part of just simply mythology or cosmology among a people is really kind of insulting, because these people have had experiences with these creatures for thousands of years, and and they have this long relationship. And so that in itself is something we could talk about throughout the show, or even do another show, because
Mhm.
that's just something that absolutely fascinates me. And there's a huge history that just now around this in the Pacific Northwest, but even throughout the United States, even in Eastern Texas. I've been really interested. I've been wanting to do a project. I don't know how I would do it, but the ranching culture, the cowboy culture of Eastern Texas, has a very long history of Bigfoot and Sasquatch encounters within ranching families going back generations. And this is something that is not well understood nor recorded. And so the whole cowboy ranching culture around Bigfoot and Sasquatch is something that really needs to be looked at. And I knew people with the Texas Bigfoot Association in Texas. They do the big conference, and I've talked to some of them, and I'm like, you really need to get out and interview these families, because there's a whole lexicon of Bigfoot words that the Texas ranchers use that are not indigenous words, but are words that they have created themselves, that have been passed down from generation to generation within ranching families in Eastern Texas.
That's the same like in Appalachia.
Yep.
Appalachia, same thing. It's interesting you said that. In my notes, I wrote that every culture has tortillas, a great flood, and a hairy man that lives outside the village.
Exactly.
So they all have.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really interesting, because one of the things I've noticed, and I've only come across this just anecdotally, but in my research area where I was doing research, there are two old homes that go back at least to the Civil War in this area. And one of the things I've noticed is people, and I've read about this in Appalachia. You might have heard of this. It's called a double garden. Have you heard about this?
I've heard of that term. I couldn't tell you what it is right now.
Okay, so in a double,
I've heard of it though.
people that have these encounters with Bigfoot or Sasquatch. So a lot of it in Appalachia, because of the poverty and the lack of resources, the Appalachian cultures are horticultural people. So they grow gardens, they grow everything from corn to specific peppers to replace the vitamin C, because scurvy was very big in Appalachia. Scurvy in particular, which is a vitamin C nutrient deficiency, and a lot of the miners, to supplement their food, they would horticulture. But because they had encounters with wood boogers, or boogers as they were called, or in wood,
Oh boogers.
yeah, they would steal vegetables from the garden. So what the women would do is they would plant two gardens. They would plant a garden closer to the woods, and then one for the family. So when the Sasquatch would come up, they would take from the garden these tomatoes or whatever, and they wouldn't steal from the family. Ironically, this is the exact same tradition practiced among the Tlingit and the Northwest Coast and Canadian cultures. Is if they were in an area hunting that they knew belonged to the Kushtaka, or or any of the different words for Bigfoot in these areas, they would leave a third of their catch for the Sasquatch, so that if they were camping at night, the creatures would not come down and steal their food for their families. So this reciprocal relationship between the material culture of modern humans and Sasquatch has existed for a long time among European immigrants in Appalachia to the indigenous peoples of North America. There is this understanding that this is theirs, we are visitors, and we will somehow make this work. Yeah, I mean, when you read the old accounts of, especially in Washington State and Canada, you hear about raiding parties where the Sasquatch would come down in the middle of the night and steal the from the indigenous peoples their fish catch for the day, and they just learned that, if they were in their areas that were known to be Sasquatch areas, that they would leave offerings or food offerings so that they wouldn't be harassed in their villages. And this is Northern California. Californian culture is the same. The Great Basin culture is the same thing. It's really intriguing. That as an anthropologist, that fascinates me. Absolutely.
Alaska's got the same thing you're talking about.
Yeah.
They're more violent up there, seems like. So they leave out more of an offering for them, like
Yeah.
a separate kill.
Yeah, it's just really, I mean, and even one of the really good books that was written, University of Washington State had an academic conference on Sasquatch and Bigfoot in the 70s, and there was all the academic papers that came out of that became a book called Man-Like Monsters on Trial, and it was all the papers written by anthropologists and different writers on Bigfoot, but many of the individual chapters are about the culture around Bigfoot, not just the masks that have been made by the traditional masks by the Northwest Coast peoples, but also in Kazakhstan and different places that have these creatures as well, where they're called the Barmanau. And so there were academic essays in that, and that's one of the better books that actually looks at this worldwide. It's called Man-Like Monsters on Trial, and I've recommended this book to many people, and it's been out for a long. Hancock Press publishes it. University of Washington Press, I think, took it over and now is republishing it. I'm not sure, but it's well worth the read. It's really, really good.
I'll have to take a look at that. Man-Like Monsters on Trial.
Yeah.
The mask from the tribes is intriguing to me.
Yeah.
Because those are based off something. They never make things up off things they don't see.
Yeah, I mean the Kwakiutl people of the Pacific Northwest. If you notice Zenequa, which is the wild woman of the woods, you'll see her with the oval mouth, which is the whistling mouth. That's really common. It's known as Zenequa in their language, and in fact, the Zenequa are actually a part of their totem and clan system. So there are people who are Zenequa clan, and in fact, it's a part of their ceremonial and traditional life. And I could go into that a little bit without getting into specifics, because there are certain areas of respect for these traditions. But one of the healing traditions, which is called the winter ceremony, Zenequa figures prominently and in some of the ceremonial dances, and it's an ancestral tradition. And among the Zenequa clan, they see Zenequa as an ancestor. So what the Canadians call Sasquatch, and is known as Zenequa Bukwis in the Northwest Coast traditions, figures very prominently in their culture, both as a cultural identifier and how they identify as Kwakiutl people, but also within a ceremonial complex in which these creatures are represented during a particular. So it's known as the winter ceremony, and it's a very important ceremony among the Kwakiutl. But you're absolutely correct, and these masks are, they're common among many of the Northwest Coast and Alaskan Native peoples. And again, they see them as very matter of fact. And so there are lots of interesting examples of this throughout Indian country in North America, but in First Nation Canada, absolutely.
And they almost all overlap. I'll let you get to your 2014 sighting before I ask like
Okay,
the going away questions because I got like 15 minutes left. And I didn't want to keep you any later.
we can go a bit we can go a bit longer if you want, because this is
Okay.
and there's so much to cover. So my 2014 sighting. So I was in this area that I had been hearing calls, wood knocks during the day, afternoon. Was hiking in this area, and it brought me up on what was based essentially a ridge line over the creek. It was about, I want to say, 75 to 80 feet over the creek, and so I had been doing these by myself, and I brought in a Maryland researcher who I knew, who is local to this area. And to make a long story short, where we were camping was not necessarily legal camping, but we decided to do what's called a cold camp. We had no fire, so we basically went up there with a one tent. I brought no tent, and we were going to just sit out and listen, just sit there on the ridgeline and listen. And so what happened was, you have to kind of you come into a parking area and then you hike in. So there's no, you can't, like, off trail, you can't, you can't take motorbikes or anything up here. So I had a friend of mine who was going to drop us off, and we had to carry some equipment up, to this ridge, and it was about 3 to 4 mile hike in and then back to the parking lot. And so what had happened was, the friend that dropped us off, um, said, "I'll help you guys carry this stuff up," and I said that would be nice. So we're walking through, and understand, as you're walking, you're going up an elevation like this. And so the really interesting thing about this area was there were different kinds of trees. And one of the things that is really intriguing, and I've spoken to other researchers about this, is with conifer trees, which are the trees that don't change their leaves. They're like the pine needle trees, the conifers. This was a mixed forest of deciduous and conifers. And as you went up in elevation, you had more conifers. And so I found that really intriguing. So we were going up in elevation and elevation. And finally, then you had to, like, you come off the trail and then go up another 30 feet up to this plateau on top of the ridge, which is where we're going to camp. So we're dropping off all the gear and everything. And the friend that I brought with me, the other researcher, was setting up camp. And I realized it was dusk. I had no flashlight, and my friend had to walk all the way back through the woods by himself to his car. And I said, "I'm not having that. I'm going with you." So the sun is going down, it's getting dusk. So I'm walking him back to his car. And then I said, "Thank you. Come back in the morning and pick us up." He drives off, and then I have to walk all the way back up without a flashlight. So here I
Don't
am.
like that. Don't
So
like that at all.
here I am walking by myself. And it's interesting. As soon as there's a certain part of the path that begins the elevation, I felt every eye on me. And as I was going up an elevation on both sides of me, both sides of the trail, there was, as I walked, it walked. As I walked, it walked. And I stopped. And if you've ever been in a blind panic where your adrenals kick in and you were like, your life is in danger, and it's all adrenal. It's an adrenal reaction. And I was like, I've got to get to the camp. I got to get to camp. So I kept walking faster and faster, and these things were following me up, following me up. And when I hit the point where I had to go up that 30 feet back to the thing, I stopped on the trail because I had to actually pivot and then walk up a steep incline, which you're already tired once you hit that point. I had to walk up that steep incline, and I turned to my right, and there was the juvenile was right there. And it was lanky. It was silver gray. It was about 6.5, 7 feet tall. And it looked at me and it grinned. It gave me a grin, which is a threat gesture with primates, but it grinned at me like it was smiling at me. And then it dove behind a tree. And then I turned to my left, and coming up the ridge line, coming up like this, because the trail was on an incline, I saw a creature in silhouette that was well over 8 feet tall, and it was humongous. It was much bigger than what I'm interpreting as a juvenile. And this thing looked like the Patterson-Gimlin creature as far as its stature and its arms, and its arms were down past its knees, and it was coming right up the creek bed, like it was coming up towards me where I'm standing on the path, like it was coming up like this, and I could see it in silhouette. And then when I looked, and of course I'm in a panic, so I'm running up the hill. At this point, I hit the camp where my friend is setting up camp, and I am white. Now I'm a type 1 diabetic, so I take insulin to survive. And he looked at me thinking I was having a diabetic incident, and he's like, what's wrong? And I'm like, and he goes, is your blood sugars really low? And I said, no, I just saw 2 of them. That's what came out of my mouth. And I just fell onto the floor of the camp. I just fell. I was in so much disarray. And he said he jumped over me and went towards the trail to see if he could still see them. Of course, they were gone at that point. And that was just the start of my evening. So so we're setting up camp. I'm telling him what I saw. He was like almost in disbelief because he wasn't there. He didn't see it with me. I mean, that's what was so extraordinary. So 2 eyewitnesses, 2 people who could have seen this amazing thing. One was driven off and gone, and then the other one was setting up camp. And this happened while I was going back to camp. So so then this is what is that wasn't the terrifying part. The terrifying part was later that evening. So we decided not to light a fire. We decided to have a cold camp because we knew that they were in the area. And sometimes campfires attract them, I've heard, and sometimes they detract from them. So we just had this agreement. Let's not have a fire. So I had a bedroll, and I had bedrolled myself outside, and my friend had a small pup tent that he crawled into. And it was kind of, it was October, so it wasn't really freezing cold yet. It was that kind of hunting season, kind of chill in the air, but not too crazy. So I said, look, I'm going to sleep out on the bedroll, and we'll see what happens. They came back, and they came back with friends. So it wasn't just the 2 that I think. I could hear at least 2 others. And you have to understand the way Seneca Creek is it's this small canyon creek. So the creek goes off in both directions, and we're up. So about, I don't know, it was about midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, we could hear them calling back and forth to each other. We could hear them calling back and forth up and down the canyon. And they kept the calls kept getting closer and closer and closer. And we could hear them walking up the sides of the ridge towards us. So it's almost like they were triangulating our position. And then they began to hoot and holler, and we could hear them running around our camp. We couldn't see them, but we could hear them bipedally running in circles around our camp. They were throwing small pebbles at us, not big stones. And I'll go a little bit into that in just a second, but we could hear them pitching stones at us. And at one point, and my friend was so terrified by the yelling and the scream. This went on for a long period. It wasn't like a few hoot and howls. This went on for like 2 hours. They were trying to intimidate us to get off the mountain, but we couldn't leave because it was such steep terrain. We would have killed ourselves trying to get out of the woods back to the back, and we had nobody to drive us home. So it would have been one hell of a long walk home, on a back country road. So, we ended up, just sticking it out and staying there. But I'll never forget this. It got so terrifying. We had no guns. This is Maryland. We have no guns. I think I had a pocket knife on me. I think I had a Swiss Army pocket knife. These things are, making hoot and howl, yelling, screaming. And then it would die down and it would pick back up. So he was so terrified. He was in his tent and would not leave. I'm on a bedroll exposed. So I'm like, nerves of steel going on here. Had we had a FLIR, had we had the proper equipment, it would have been the sighting of a lifetime with evidence.
I was going to say you'd have been PG film part 2.
Yeah, exactly.
Evidence.
Tell people, I said, the most extraordinary Bigfoot encounter of my life, I had no equipment. But I will tell you, after I had this experience, I told people about it, and I've told the story to a few other. I've been on a couple of podcasts where I've talked about this. But what was the most extraordinary thing in the evening was a call that I had never heard anyone ever talk about until about 5 years ago on another podcast. So one of the most extraordinary things that I heard was up. So this ridge line had smaller ridges alongside of it. So there were almost like dips in a hill kind of thing. To my right, far right, what I heard was two of these individuals clicking back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, talking what are called palatal clicks in languages. So this does occur in human language, but it occurs with vowels and with sounds. So some of the languages of South Africa, Juntoise, where the languages is interspersed with clicks. It does occur in human languages, but this was all clicking back and forth as if it was a language without any vowels, without any other vocalizations, just the clicking. And it went on. This went on constantly, back and forth, and then it stopped. And I'm like, what am I listening to? And I mean, it was at a very fast-paced clicking sound. And this went on, and I'm going like, I need a recorder. I need, and then I bookmarked that in my head. And several years later, after this incident happened, I was listening to some podcast, and there was a woman who had had a sighting in a national park with her husband. And she said, "You'll never believe what I heard. I heard two of these creatures clicking back and forth." And I'm like, oh my God. And not everybody reports this, but I'm hearing more and more people talk about this clicking language that they do, this clicking back and forth. And I mean, I'm trained in anthropology. I know what this occurs in human language and how it occurs in human language, but I've never heard of people in other researchers, but a handful mention this. And I was always very like, I'm not telling people about this because they're going to think, I mean, even having a Bigfoot sighting is crazy enough for some people, but then to talk about this, I did hear, the traditional, the screams that were going on, the hoops and howls that they did. Also the chatter that you hear in the Sierra recordings, Sierra sound recordings. I did hear some chatter. Often at distance, it was a very low growling chatter. Like I said, this went on for a while. And then in the morning, when the sun came up, we came off the mountain. But when I got off the bedroll, there were these circular quartzite stones that lined perfectly my sleeping bedroll. And it was almost as if they were throwing them to outline my body. And I had about 40 of these things outside of my sleeping roll, as if they were throwing these rocks, because I thought it was raining or like drizzling through the trees. They were throwing rocks at us, but they were perfect quartzite, round. They almost look like trying to think of the word like a geode, but they were quartzite from the area, because the Piedmonts in Maryland have the highest level of quartzites in the Appalachian Mountains are actually here in Maryland in the Piedmonts. And so there's quartzite everywhere in this area. And they were all almost perfectly cylindrical, and they were surrounding my bedroll. And I collected several of them and kept them. I still have them. But I thought that is the weirdest thing. But yeah, that was my 2014 sighting. And I jokingly tell people the one in Canada, which was fantastic, had eyewitnesses, FLIR, footprints. There were no footprints from this encounter because the ground on the top of the ridge line was hard packed soil, so you could not get you couldn't get. I saw no prints. We actually went down to the creek bed that morning to look, and we didn't see any prints. So they were, I guess, very good at not leaving them. But that the difference between my Maryland sighting and the Canadian sighting was the Maryland sighting was very eventful, very terrifying, very intriguing, but it's anecdotal. I don't have anything to other than my own recounting. The Harrison Hot Springs sighting, lots of physical evidence, lots of eyewitness testimony, and so I kind of have both.
I like the full gambit. You mentioned the clicking. I've heard several hypotheses that the wood knock is a form of click, like a echolocation.
Yep.
Instead of hitting it, they're doing it in their head, like
Yep.
a Parasolopus.
Yep. And I've actually heard stories of in Georgia where it sounds like a car door shutting, like a metal car door is being shut. And that people in Georgia who do research, there's several groups in Georgia, they've been out in areas where there's activity, and they'll hear what sounds like a metal car door slamming, and they think it's actually being made by the mouth of these creatures.
Heard that a bunch of times. I kind of run with the Georgia bunch.
Yeah.
Uh, Bob Grumpy Wilson that just passed away.
Yeah.
I hang out kind of with his bunch.
Yeah.
Now.
A lot of activity in Georgia. Georgia's got a lot going on. It really.
And it's pretty too, because it butts up with Alabama. It's just right there.
Yep. That's interesting. That's interesting country. I've not been down there myself. I've been in the Carolinas. I have been to Georgia, but not in the wooded areas of Georgia. I've been to Savannah and Atlanta, but there actually have been some sightings outside of Savannah as well.
Yeah, I mean that's wild. That's palmetto country there.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, do you have any questions or anything?
Oh yeah, I was going to run by the traditional, since you're an anthropologist and you are a knower, obviously. I mean, it's not any doubt in your mind that they exist. Where do you think they hide? And is there any is the woo factor a thing with you at all?
I mean, I let's put it this way: we don't know enough about these creatures and how they live and how they work in the environment to discount anything. So to discount the woo, I mean, we don't know what these creatures are capable of doing, other than what people have observed. And like I said, the ethnohistorical record of how indigenous people see Sasquatch, Bigfoot. There are some accounts of them having abilities that would be PSI or psychic abilities, and their abilities to essentially make people not see them, or use even what we would call infrasound to put people in a like almost a hypnagogic state, to where they pass out, they get sick. You hear people being around Sasquatch and all of a sudden feeling like they have to throw up. They become violently ill. There more than likely is something going on in the realm of infrasound in particular. Tigers do this, elephants do this. I mean, other animals in the natural kingdom have the ability to use infrasound to paralyze their prey. Tigers, we know, do this. Elephants will use it to communicate over very long distances. So who's to say that these creatures have not evolved the ability to use this as a way of either hiding themselves or taking people off their trail? I do know these creatures are extremely good at hiding in plain sight. I mean, literally, you could be in a forest. A Sasquatch could be right next to a tree. And if you're not, we're humans. We're looking all over the place. We're not really in tune with what we're doing. We're not set up, unless you're, grew up in the woods or it's a part of your culture. We're not really attuned to what's going on around us in a wooded situation. So we're hiking, kids are out, a Sasquatch could be standing right there, blending in with the trees and watching you from 40 feet away, and you don't even see it. So
especially in the Pacific Northwest, where it's all toothpicks.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing. Even here, I had an incident in the same region. I was on the other end of the ridge line where I'd had my sighting in the same wooded area, and I was in a clearing. I was in an absolute clearing, and I was hearing these creatures were calling to one another. They were whistling back and forth around me. There were two of them, and there was and my distraction was in this area and this direction, listening to them whistle back and forth. This is during the afternoon. And it was remote. There wasn't, people weren't around me, and they were whistling that high pitch whistle back and forth, back and forth. And one came, so I'm up on a ridge. There was a tree halfway between the ridge top, so I could only see the top of the tree. One of these creatures ran up right behind that. I could see its hand. I could hear it. I turned around just in time to see its hand hit the top of the tree and pull it down. So it ripped the tree, and all I could see was the top of its hand. I could see this part of its hand grab the top of the tree and rip it down. And in the time I ran over to the other end of the ridge to look, it was gone, and the tree was bent over. So I actually saw that with my eyes, and that was like 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
But that's when they do that. They just rip something in half and make a real pop sound to distract you.
Yeah, and I could see the top of its hand, and I'll never forget the size of its hand and how big it was. I mean, this took place in like 3 seconds, and it ripped the tree down. And there was no because there was deep leaf litter because it was in the fall, so there was leaf litter, so there was no prints. But it was almost like these two were distracting me while this thing. Now, had I been not on top of the ridge line, this thing could have walked up right behind me. I mean, this is the thing. If these creatures wanted to hurt me, I would be gone. I mean, I'm out there by myself. I'm not with people. I'm very, I've got pretty good nerves of steel. But when I'm Bigfoot researching, when I'm out there squatching, whatever you want to call it, I almost insist on being by myself because I think it's just the ethnographer, it's the anthropologist in me. I want to have that experience. I want to see these creatures. I would love to have interacted with them, somehow get some sort of communique going. I don't know. I mean, I whistle to them back. I'm a terrible whistler, but I actually found that a rock clacking. I'll take 2 rocks and I'll clack. And in the area where I had researched, that I found that much more effective than wood knocking. So taking 2 rocks and clacking them together got much better responses than taking wood against trees. And I know some people get better responses doing that. Some people they'll bring instruments and play in the woods. They'll do other things to attract their interest,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I've heard the people taking trombones and guitars out there and playing them for them.
Absolutely. I'm sure that, it piques their curiosity. And, like I said,
Clarinet was the one that was a big one. That's right. So,
clarinet, flute. I've heard people bringing flutes out. Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting. The ability to hypothesize about what these creatures are and what their behaviors are and what does that mean culturally is just endless. And until somebody makes contact and is able to do a field study living among them, which is ultimately, I think, the goal, is to do some sort of ethnographic research where you're living with a family of Sasquatch to understand their culture, because that's the only way we're going to know. I mean, having a body on a slab is great to do biological testing and morphological, testing on these creatures, but to understand how they live among themselves, their family structure, everything about them is really, I think, the ultimate goal, other than just having a body. I mean, there has to be behavioral research and ethnographic research done on these creatures. I mean, ultimately, that's the key. That's what really needs to happen.
And once we figure out how to get past this seemingly ability to ruin electronics,
Yeah,
that if we get past that, like technologically, I think a lot's going to happen as far as knowing.
yeah. I mean,
more.
a couple of years ago, there was a researcher, I want to say he was in Oregon, who had adapted this weird. He'd made a hiking cap, and he put a small camera on both ends of the cap. So as he's riding his horse or walking, he's getting continual footage. And I remember seeing this, but what he found is that these creatures would crawl along the wood line brush, and in one instance, he had his head tilted back, and the camera, which back then the technology wasn't is what it is now, he caught the head of one of these creatures kind of peering out that he caught on the camera. And so he had this setup. So he would walk into the woods every day wearing his hat. Didn't put up trail cameras, didn't do anything. He would just walk and do the same thing every time, stop and eat lunch, and they got used to seeing him. And they saw no cameras, and he would always wear the same rimmed hat, and it had a camera system in it, and that's how he was able to get any footage or any. Actually, I think it actually even had sound, but yeah, I mean, people have been doing this for years, and I can tell you this: I don't know anybody who's had any success with trail cameras. I think they are just way too smart for that. You know, they
Yeah, it's
yeah,
that's 101 stuff. I have seen some footage that like one of those things some of the researchers have like don't show anyone else, kind of like the
yeah,
fellow you're talking about that
yeah,
had like juveniles in a trail camera at night,
yeah,
but nothing like Patterson-Gimlin level or gorillas in the mist. It was
yeah,
all just blurry, but you could just see the shapes.
yeah. I mean, I think I mean, there's different ideas about like there's some people who say that the first relic hominid discovery will probably be in Indonesia. It'll probably be in Orang Pendek. It'll probably be in an area like the Kerinci National Forest. It'll be someplace where it's an island environment and somebody's there at the right time at the right place with the right camera, and boom. But as you both and I know, you could have the best footage in the world. People are still going to say, "Oh, it's fake. It's whatever." You're gonna always have naysayers anytime you bring out evidence. It's just, I mean, I've been raked across the coals many times. Even for my professional background and my interest in this, because I'm very open about it. I think that I've got friends in Canada. I've got friends all over the United States who have had experiences, and these are professional people, reputable people, very even tempered people that have had these experiences, and they just can't be discounted.
Yeah, eventually the tech's going to catch up. Something's got to give. The
I think the eDNA is the real
mhm.
crucial part here. I think what's going to happen is it's going to be an eDNA discovery first, and then a holotype of one of these creatures will be found, as a type specimen. But I think really the eDNA technology has gotten so good now that it's just a matter of using water sampling in certain areas, soil sampling, and something's going to come up that is, between humans and the great apes. They've actually already gotten a few water samples that are intriguing that show something between humans and chimps, in particular, and areas of Washington State and certain waterways. So, what is that? You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Yeah,
I've heard of those.
yeah, yeah,
All right, man. This has been a great conversation. I was not ready to have this quality of conversation today. Be quite honest. You never know, but yeah, this has been great, and I'd love to have you back on to go,
I would
deeper in the subject.
look at different aspects of this. This is just an endless, fascinating subject, and now more and more people are coming aboard academically on this subject. That are people, both in cultural anthropology, linguistics, anatomy, and anatomical specialists, that are willing to come forward and say, let's give this a look. So the more and more we have that going on, and more academic funding can be found, that is the key. Funding is the key
Yep.
to being in the field long enough to be able to do and replicate and get things on film and test eDNA samples. It's not cheap to test DNA. It's a very expensive process, and that's one of the reasons why we don't have a lot of DNA studies is because of the expense.
It's like $1,000 a pop.
Yep, it is.
Stupid amount of money. What we need is like an Oppenheimer slash, Los Alamos
Exactly.
level of effort to where we don't stop until we have one. But
Exactly.
right now we're just like you got dudes like me out there with a video camera, like, and of course I don't do this crap, but like whoop whoop, and
Yeah.
it's worthless. It's anecdotal, like you said at best,
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
but it's going to happen. It's fun to talk about it anyway. I mean,
Yeah.
that's why I have anthropologists on to kind of cleanse my palate in between the crazy anecdotal. I,
Right.
I bring it back in a little bit. I have paleontologists on. They go right out to Bigfoot, kind of come back into the shore and eat a sandwich and a bag of chips and go back out in the swimming pool.
Yeah. Right. 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 Yeah.
I love talking anthropology and paleontology though, because I'm obsessed with dinosaurs, and to
Oh,
me, they kind of scratch the same itch as a cryptid, but they're real, and so
yeah.
you got a lot of stuff to talk about.
Absolutely. And there's so much like, even the water cryptids, the lake cryptids. And I've also often been fascinated by some of the things that are seen in the North Atlantic off of the coast of Scotland and off of the coast of England. They have a long mariner history of mariner tales of these serpents off of the North Atlantic, and they're continually seen over generations of sailors that ply these waters for as fishermen, and off of the coast of Cornwall, going up into, I mean, though that whole cryptid water cryptid lexicon is just endlessly fascinating. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it's got precedent to be actually real because of the depth of the ocean, and there's a whole side of the planet that there could be no telling what's going on over there. I just had Dr. Robin Henson on last week, and we talked about ocean worlds, and his episode with me and him is actually airing right now. I'm kind of glancing at it.
Oh, okay.
But, yeah, he was a class act.
Yeah. I'll have to take a look at that. Yeah, and there's a lot of people who've been doing research in cryptozoology on like sea cryptids.
Mm-hmm.
Bernard Hooversmann wrote his classic In the Wake of Sea Serpents, and I mean that whole area is really fascinating.
Mm-hmm. And the same environment that would support, say, like a mosasaur, or something like it still exists. That hasn't changed. The ocean's still the same.
That's right.
So it makes you wonder what's still down there. It's other than food source would be the only thing I could think that would be different.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
We need to get some more humpbacks out there and get the megalodon back out. Get them something to eat.
Right.
You know what they said on Jurassic Park? What? So they destroy all the humpbacks? Then what?
Right.
All right, Kenneth, I'll let you go. And thanks for coming on, and look forward to future endeavors, because this is a very fun conversation. And have a good week. And thanks for watching, everybody.
Sure. And take care of yourself.
All right. See you, man.
I never didn't believe in Bigfoot. I never believed in it, didn't believe in it. I never gave it any thought.
They kept wood knocking back and forth to each other, and it was in a pattern.
Barn owls don't typically throw rocks.
I come across these tracks.
Sasquatch is still not on my mind.